thank you for having me here today. I am in awe of the roster of attendees. It's quite an impressive set of institutions, and all of your titles and backgrounds are equally impressive. I give you fair warning, I possess neither the presentation skills and energy of Professor Tomke, who actually made me a little dizzy trying to follow him around, nor do I have the slides and the professionalism of Bashir in terms of the clarity of his presentation. But hopefully what I bring you is an interesting story about our company and our industry and what strategy means therein. So Public Service Enterprise Group is about a $21 billion market cap company. We're an electric and gas company. We serve about 2 million, a little more than 2 million electric customers in New Jersey, a little less than 2 million gas customers in New Jersey. That's the regulated part of our business. Its earnings last year were about $750 million. Then the other half of the company is something called PSEG Power, which is the unregulated electric generation business. About 55% of our electricity comes from nuclear power, 30% from natural gas, and 15% from coal. And it also made approximately $750 million last year for total net income of a little over $1.4 billion. Allow me to do some rounding in my additions there. So when I first received this phone call on innovation, I thought that perhaps they had misdialed the number. I often tell the story about how if Alexander Graham Bell were to suddenly find himself around today, he would think perhaps he had missed a couple of millennia of history given the changes that have taken place in telecommunications and information sciences. Sadly, if Thomas Edison were to walk the planet today, he would think he took an afternoon nap and woke up about 20 minutes later, because he would see many of the same utility poles. In fact, if he came to my office, he would see a picture of him christening a power plant that is still functioning is a little bit of an exaggeration. The site exists and the plant is still there, but we have replaced so much of the equipment that the original hardware is quite different. Now, having said that, I do think that the electric utility has undergone some significant changes. And I have two of my colleagues who are here with me today and will be here for the rest of the week who can tell you about many of those. Diana Drysdale is the president of our unregulated solar business, and that's not a technology that we had used too extensively in the not too distant past. And Joseph Santamaria is our chief information officer, and he could tell you about many of the things we're doing from an information technology perspective. We are proud to be the #1 utility in terms of Twitter followers. We are the #3 utility in terms of Facebook friends, and we are the #5 utility in the nation in terms of installed solar megawatts. So we have done some things a little differently that perhaps Mr. Edison would not have noticed. So let's talk a little bit about the drivers of change in our industry, because I do think that there are some major macro drivers of change that I worry about, think about, and try to react to on a regular basis. And I'm going to list them not in the order of importance, but I'll lead up to the one that I worry about the most. The first driver of change is regulation. Primarily in our industry, that comes in the form of environmental regulation and design of deregulated markets. So I was perhaps a little less than precise. I won't go so far as to say that I misled you a moment ago when I talked about our unregulated generation business. It is not exactly totally unregulated. There are all kinds of rules that determine how we can and cannot sell electricity into this quote-unquote deregulated wholesale power market. But nonetheless, the environmental regulatory system that we have in place in our nation constantly imparts change to our business, whether it's mercury emissions or clean water standards or carbon emissions. And I'll remind you that many of our investments are preceded by discounted cash flow calculations that typically have break-even points in years 25 through 30. So that's arguably 3 or 4 presidential administrations depending upon longevity, many gubernatorial changes depending upon longevity. I don't think the Soviet Union rose and fell in less time than that, but you get the idea about some of the risks associated with these calculations. So #1 would be changes in environmental regulation, and I think candidly, happily, the nation continues to move forward in ever-increasing progressive regulation on the environmental front. It ebbs and flows in terms of its pace, but I don't think it ever changes direction. And the pace will be a function primarily of the economic vibrancy of the nation at the time. A second major driver of change in our industry is technology itself. Yes, central station power plants may look very much the same when you drive past them on a highway at 65 miles an hour or 55 or whatever speed you happen to be doing at the time. However, many of the older power plants required anywhere from 12 to 15,000 BTUs of energy content in fuel to produce a kilowatt hour, and now power plants require 6,000 or 6,400 BTUs of energy content in fuel to produce a kilowatt hour. So that's pretty impressive change, and certainly nuclear plants are constantly evolving, moving from large power plants to more of a smaller modular design, none built yet, but I do believe that they will be commercially viable in a decade or so time frame. And without question, wind farms and solar farms have made tremendous progress in terms of their cost advantages. And that's more on the wholesale side of the business. As we move closer to the customer, communication technologies, the ability to send price signals to customers, the ability to remotely manage energy systems is having a huge influence on our ability to operate the system and our customers' desire to engage with us. The third, however, issue that I really want to spend most of my time on is this very strange conflict that we experience in our industry, which is the fact that customers are increasingly dependent upon electricity, and I will focus on the electric side of the business rather than gas side, even as they use less of it. Now, I'm sure there are examples of other consumer goods where that's the case. I don't know of them, and no one has volunteered them to me. But by and large, electricity is becoming something that we can't seem to live without, even as we use less of it. Now, why is that the case? Well, if you are the worst consumer on the face of the planet, and you went out of your way to buy the least expensive refrigerator when your refrigerator dies, you're going to replace that 15-year-old refrigerator with something that's far more efficient. If you, true to your form, remain the worst consumer on the face of the planet, and you go out to replace that air conditioning system or that heating system when it dies after 20 years, you're going to replace it with something that's far more efficient than what you just replaced. Similarly, as your light bulbs pop or your lighting systems need to be changed, once again, true to being the worst consumer on the face of the planet, as you replace those lighting systems, you're going to replace them with something that's far, far more efficient than anything you had in your premise before. And with the exception of large industrial companies, maybe in Air Products or someone like that, I just mentioned the three biggest energy consuming devices in any customer premise, whether you're a commercial customer or an industrial customer or a homeowner. So you have massive reduction as we replace our infrastructure in terms of the energy consumed, even as we electrify our lives, whether it's with our communication devices, our entertainment devices. I realized the other day I cannot brush my teeth if the power goes out in my house, because that little stub just doesn't work, right? I connect it to the power toothbrush, but if I had to do that manually, I'm out of luck. So my wife and I decided we would, I don't know where they are, but somewhere we have manual toothbrushes in our house now in case that should ever happen. So this became abundantly clear to me and was just so obvious in Superstorm Sandy. How many of you were on the East Coast during Superstorm Sandy? Any show of hands? October 28th, 2012, 2 weeks that I'll never forget. Within 24 hours of Superstorm Sandy, I and about 5 of my fellow CEOs were on the phone with President Obama. He won't remember that conversation. I remember. It's not every day I speak to the President of the United States. And he was genuinely concerned with when we would get Newark Airport back, what was the security situation in some of our inner cities, and what would happen to the refinery and the petrochemical industry in northern New Jersey, which subsequently, you may recall, became a big issue as gasoline became rather scarce. It was a 5-minute conversation, but some pretty weighty issues that all of us discussed. Those were my issues. Some of my colleagues had separate issues. The next day, I then began a series of daily phone calls that began with Ernie Moniz, the Secretary of Energy, also from that small school down the river that Professor Tomke mentioned, and then subsequent to that, the Deputy Secretary, David Poneman. Every day, talk about the progress we were making. A colleague of mine who runs our utility had the same exact conversation on a daily basis with the governor of the state of New Jersey, Chris Christie, seeing how progress was going forward. And everybody had the same concerns. When are we getting this school system back? When are we getting this hospital back? In fact, one day in the control room, our emergency response room, that colleague of mine who runs our utility received a phone call on a cell phone from a very concerned cardiologist who had read in the newspapers or had heard on the radio, I forget what he said, that we were targeting critical loads first, and hospitals were among the critical loads. Yet his hospital was not back on the grid, and it was, I think, 24 or 48 hours later. And he had 2 open heart surgeries scheduled that day, and he wanted to know, should he do it on backup power or would we get him back? And of course we got him back that day. About a week or 2 later, I received an email from a stay-at-home parent who said that if we did not restore her power that day, she was going to send her teenager to live with me. And you know, I've told that story now so many times over the past 2 years, and it always gets the same reaction, and it's intended to get that reaction. But I assure you, that parent was as serious and as concerned about electricity as President Obama was.